Prompt engineering is one of the most important skills you'll ever learn, and vibe coding in Bolt is no exception to that. When it comes to building the app of your dreams, you're only as good as your last prompt. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through some tips and tricks to make you a fantastic prompt engineer in a very short amount of time. So when it comes to prompt engineering for vibe coding, there are 6 main principles that you want to adhere to. Out of all the principles, creating a high-level blueprint prompt is probably one of the most impactful things that you can do. It's the most foundational part of the process because this is where you basically are speaking to the virtual junior software engineer on the other side of the screen as to exactly what you're going for. The more hints and tips you can provide this junior software engineer as to where you'll be going, what the overall experience should look like, what the aesthetic should look like from the get-go, the higher the likelihood that they will write the code in a way that scales well and ultimately reaches your goal. If you start off with a very mini prompt like build me a to-do list app, it will do the thing and it will render a to-do list app. But if you want to be able to build something more bespoke, something that allows you to expand and add your taste and flavor to, you're going to have to be very thoughtful about your initial prompt because that's where you set up the entire map for where you're heading. The next one is being able to break up your prompts to Bolt in manageable chunks. If we take that junior software engineering example, ideally, you don't want to provide 10 tasks at once because at the end of the day, all of these tools, like Bolt, use language models underneath the hood. And knowing that, language models excel better when they only have a few things to focus on or direct their attention towards. So if you have a list of 10 different things to do that are not fully related, it's better to tackle one core piece at a time to increase the likelihood of 2 things. 1, that Bolt can actually reach the goal and execute exactly what we're looking for. And 2, if you feel like you need to go back to a prior version of your app, it's a lot easier to do so and a lot more convenient if you have a lot more checkpoints along the way. The next one is to be as explicit and unambiguous as possible, which in plain English means you don't just say, I don't like the overall vibe of the screen, or I don't think it's very user-friendly. That's way too vague of an instruction because you're leaving way too much margin of error for the language model underneath Bolt's hood to guess what you mean by that specific statement. Ideally, you can say, you know what, for this button, I feel like the color is not very accessible to many people. Or overall, there's an accessibility issue in the app where when I click on this, this happens. And when I click on this modal, it's so small that the average person wouldn't see it. So if you're able to give a lot more meticulous feedback to Bolt, it'll increase the likelihood that it knows exactly what to solve, or at least what to solve for. The next one is context and system prompts. And this really applies if you want to take advantage of Bolt.new's knowledge base. So when you go to Bolt, you'll notice at the bottom left-hand side here, if you hover over and you click on settings, you'll be able to go to something called knowledge. And in knowledge, you'll be able to assign a project-based prompt, meaning you have a prompt that applies to a very specific project that you're currently working on, or you can apply a global system prompt. And what this will do is every single time you load up a brand new session or a brand new chat, it will remember these instructions. So this is very helpful if you find yourself having to repeat the same instructions over and over again, or if you want to apply the same language model type, the same set of instructions for color and design, or anything else around your preferences that you want Bolt to always be aware of. The next one is clarify. And this one involves you using one of the best features of Bolt to have a side conversation with the AI before actually implementing any changes. So just to show you what I mean by this is a project that I had in progress on a flow state, basically productivity app. And at the left-hand side here, you'll see this button that's called toggle between discussion and build mode. So if you click on it, you can have a back and forth conversation with the AI. You can ask it for its opinion on what it should do next. You can go back and forth and make sure that it fully understands the scope of your instructions. So you can literally tell it, here's the plan, and then play back what you understand of that plan. Because sometimes, especially when it comes to implementing language models behind the scenes, let's say you want to hook up OpenAI or Claude behind the scenes, it has a tendency to bias towards something like GPT-4. So if you tell it, hey, here's a code snippet of exactly how to call OpenAI 4.1, play back what you understand on what we're going to do next, and it says, I'm going to implement GPT-4, that's your moment where you can correct the mistake before you go into the endless loop of figuring out why it's not implementing it on the actual app you're building. So chat mode really helps you buy time and more importantly, helps you make sure that the AI is completely aligned with where you're heading. The last principle is a very straightforward one, but also an important one. And this is basically instead of just sending a blob of text to something like Bolt, you can structure it in a way where it's broken up into specific sections. So it understands which section is design, which section are your main clarifications that you have for the AI, and the first part could be, let's say, the overall context of why you're building this to begin with, so the AI can understand what you're trying to innovate and how it can help you get there. So if we go into something like ChatGPT, we can say something like, I want you to act as a prompt engineer, and I want you to build me a prompt in unformatted markdown in a code block that builds out an app for finding recipes for specific dietary restrictions like gluten-free or vegan. It should be a very beautiful, future, modern-looking app, and it should have very easy to locate buttons. So let's say we send that to something like ChatGPT. It will now be able to create a prompt for us, and the key thing here is it's going to output it in a format that we can easily copy-paste, and it's well segmented by structure. We can make this prompt way better, which I'll show you very shortly, but overall, it creates some form of persona assignment, and then it creates a new part of the prompt that structures all of our wish list for this prompt. So you can see a landing page with a bold headline and subheadline explaining the values. So let's say, find recipes for your lifestyle, gluten-free, vegan, keto, and more. A central search bar that lets users type keywords or dietary restrictions, etc. And then at the very bottom, it has an overall statement saying use placeholder data for the recipes and dietary tags, which makes sense because typically you don't want to go for functionality first. Functionality is really helpful if you hook up something like Supabase to your Bolt app. And that usually happens in the second, third, or fourth prompts down the line. Initially, you want to get the overall structure, the overall foundation, and you can think of it as if you're putting the framing for a house. You don't start out building a house by buying all the furniture you're going to put in the house. You first make the plan, make the blueprint, and you put the frame for the entire foundation of the home to be built before you build on top of it. And that's the same thing with your initial prompt, and AI can help you write this prompt and structure it for you so that all you have to do is copy and then paste it directly into Bolt and get your journey started. Now, one core thing to keep in mind is right now Bolt is using Claude 4 underneath the hood. So while Bolt has tons of infrastructure to make this prompting process way easier, at the end of the day, you are speaking to a more refined version of Claude 4. So even when you're creating your prompts, especially if you're using AI, you can also try to get the AI to research how to talk to Claude 4 and optimize the prompt, which will make your prompt a lot more refined and a lot more tailored to speak to the underlying AI. And one of the tools I love to use for this is something like Perplexity. But you can use any AI tool that lets you connect to the web. And this is an example of a prompt I'd give it to help us write the perfect prompt for Bolt. I want you to act as a prompt engineer and designer, but primarily for the prompt engineering side, I want you to look up all documentation and YouTube videos that you can find on how best to prompt Bolt.new. And at the same time, I also want you to go through documents on the best practices for prompting Claude 4 to build the following app. I want to build an app that is basically a beautiful recipe app that helps anyone with dietary restrictions make their perfect recipes using AI. And then I'll send that over. And then now it's going to do research on two things. The best way to speak to Bolt, meaning all the best principles, maybe even my YouTube videos in there. And then you can see it will also research Claude 4 and the best ways to prompt that. You can see that here. It's going through Anthropic's documentation, Reddit articles, LinkedIn, everything you can imagine. And what's really cool is it's able to produce this prompt very quickly. And you can see if we go into it, it structures it in a perfect way where it says task, build a dietary aware recipe application with user auth process, dynamic recipe database, AI-powered ingredient substitution, meal planning, and modern UI with accessibility features. And then there's a few different sections it comes up with. So one is context, constraints, as well as the overall initial output. And when it comes to breaking up all those mini prompts you have to accomplish all the different tasks, here are some examples of sample prompts. So for user authentication, you can ask for something like, implement a user authentication using Supabase, and what you would do is go and hook up Supabase to your project, and then you can say the following. Include a sign-up page and a login page with email and password, and require email verification for new users. And in this case, just mentioning email verification tells the app that it doesn't just have to create a login panel, it has to be able to create the infrastructure to listen in for email verification from Supabase's system. The next example is database setup. So let's say you want to add a database and you want to have specific control over the type of database you create. So add a Supabase database called product with these following columns. Now, by default, Supabase and the AI will come up with it for you. But if you want to impose a certain structure, you can just ask for it. So I want some form of ID, name, price, and create it at date. And then build the CRUD functionality for products. Users can create new products, view a list of products, edit a product, and delete a product. So the main thing I mentioned here is CRUD, which basically stands for create, reading, update, and deleting, so enabling those functionalities, and that gives enough of a clue to the AI to know exactly what we want. Another example is Stripe integration, even though we have a separate video just for this that you should definitely watch. So here we say integrate Stripe payments for a subscription plan. Add a pricing page that lets logged in users subscribe to a premium plan for $10 a month. When the user clicks subscribe, use Stripe checkout to process the payment and update the user's subscription status in the app. And a bonus prompt you could add is add a one-time payment feature using Stripe. So you also want to be very specific about the type of payment structure. Is it recurring or is it a one-time? The way the app is built will really depend on how this is structured. And our last example here is on improving the user interface of your app, which again we have a separate video for. But here we said, apply a modern UI design to the app using Tailwind CSS. It uses this by default, so you don't have to actually mention it. For the homepage, make the header navigation bar sticky with a gradient background and style the buttons with Tailwind classes. In this case, you don't have to say that again. Ensure the overall layout is responsive for mobile and desktop. And two bonus prompts here are add a subtle animation to improve the user experience, make elements fade in on page load, and add a hover animation to the primary callout action button. And last one is make sure the UI is fully responsive on small screens, collapse the navigation bar on the mobile menu, stack sections vertically, and use larger touch-friendly buttons. Ensure no content overflows off-screen on mobile. And with that, you're off the prompting journey, and honestly, this is a skill that stacks over time, so the more you use these techniques, the better you'll become, and the more powerful of a Bolt builder you'll be.